It's easy to call a place paradise when you've never seen the scars of war up close. On the planet New Lisbon, they called it paradise. Mild weather, perfect for farming, with snow only dusting the polar regions. Farmers and ranchers swore it was the closest thing to heaven they'd ever seen. But for us, for our squad, that paradise was anything but. I remember when we first touched down. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting a soft glow over the land. It seemed like everything was at peace, like life had never known a struggle. But for my squad, New Lisbon was a homecoming, a place where we hoped to find something we'd lost. It was supposed to be a break, a moment to catch our breath. What we didn't expect was to find ourselves face to face with a different kind of war, one that had nothing to do with guns, bombs, or battlefields. As we trudged toward the little village, the quiet was almost suffocating. It was strange how a place could be so peaceful on the outside, but feel so heavy, so full of memories we didn't want to face. Our team was a mix of people from different worlds. There was Brex, our ever-optimistic Lance, who tried to make light of everything, even when the world seemed like it was about to fall apart. Then there was Ipo, the grizzled veteran, always watching, always calculating, his face hard and unforgiving. And then there was Johnny, the heart of our crew, the guy who could make you laugh, even when there was nothing funny about the situation. Johnny had a way of pulling us together, of making sure no one ever felt alone. But Johnny wasn't the same anymore. The gates of that little garden were the first thing I noticed when we arrived. They were old, simple, like something you'd find on any backwater planet. But that's where things took a turn, where the paradise we'd been promised turned into something else entirely. We didn't know it yet, but someone was waiting for us. Someone who had been waiting a long time. Nancy Blair. She had no idea what was about to walk through those gates. I could see her now, standing there in her garden, clipping herbs, the soft sound of her shears cutting through the air, peaceful, serene, a simple life. And then we appeared, 3 of us, walking toward her with a heavy weight in every step. The moment she saw us, she froze. Her eyes locked on Johnny, and for a moment there was a look in her face, a mix of hope and fear that, I'll never forget. Johnny had changed. He wasn't the man she remembered. There was no greeting, no hello, just the sound of her breath catching in her throat as she saw what we had become. We weren't soldiers anymore. We weren't just a squad. We were scars of the universe, bruised and broken, patched up with metal and wires. But she didn't see that. She saw Johnny, the man she had once loved. "Do you bring me news of my Johnny?" she asked, her voice trembling as she took a step toward him. That was when it hit me. Her world, her simple, peaceful world, had just collided with the brutal truth of ours. Johnny didn't have eyes anymore. His face was half gone. His body, barely recognizable, replaced by cybernetic limbs and metal plates. He had taken a blast in the face, a suicide mission to save us. He had lost everything in the name of duty. But the worst part, he was still trying to smile. He was still trying to be the man he was before. And for Nancy, it was like staring at a ghost. Her Johnny, the one with kind eyes and a quiet smile, was gone, replaced by a man who could hardly remember what it felt like to be human. I could see her struggling. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But instead, she stepped closer, as if hoping that if she got close enough, if she could just touch him, it would all be like it used to be. "Johnny, where are your eyes that look so mild? Where are the eyes so grey as the sea?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Johnny, or what was left of him, couldn't answer the way he once did. Instead, he gave a crooked grin. and it was heartbreaking. It wasn't the grin of a man who had won a victory. It was the grin of someone who had lost it all. "I can run," he said, his voice hoarse but proud. "I can run and run all the long day on these. Don't worry about me, Nancy. These legs are just fine." But the truth was, they weren't. They were artificial, cold, and mechanical. The legs, the arms, the face, all of it was a reminder that the man she once knew was gone. And Nancy couldn't handle it. She didn't want to. And then, in the quiet of that garden, the truth hit her like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about Johnny. It was about the cost of war, the price of survival. Johnny had come back, but not as the man he once was. He had come back in pieces, held together by technology, and Nancy had to face the brutal reality of that. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she ran toward him, leaping into his arms, a mix of biological and cybernetic, and wept. The moment was raw, unfiltered. She wanted him back, but Johnny knew the truth. He was never coming back whole, and as much as he wished he could, there was nothing he could do to make it right. "I'm sorry, lass," he whispered, sinking to one knee, "but I've got me pay and me pension. Rosie can be proud of her daw. Can you be proud of me now? Will you marry me, Nancy Blair?" The question hung in the air, like a fragile thread, waiting to snap. For a moment, the entire universe seemed to pause. It wasn't about the war anymore. It wasn't about the cost of survival. It was about two people, broken by the world, trying to find something to hold on to. And as Nancy looked down at the man she had once known, the weight of everything they had been through pressed down on her. Would she say yes, or would she turn away, unable to accept what Johnny had become? But before she could answer, the others, Apo and Brex, shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. They knew what was at stake. And as for me, I was just trying to make sense of it all. The squad was never the same after that. And maybe, just maybe, this homecoming wasn't the end of our story, but the beginning of something much darker, something that none of us were ready for. And as the tension between them grew, all I could think was, where do we go from here? Nancy didn't answer Johnny right away. She just stood there, her hands trembling at her sides, staring at the man who had once been her whole world. Her silence wasn't just from shock. It was from the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. Johnny, the brave man she had fallen in love with, was gone, replaced by this thing, this mechanical version of him. A part of her wanted to say yes, to tell him she could love him no matter what he had become. But another part of her, the part that still remembered the warmth of his touch, the sparkle in his eyes, couldn't reconcile with the cold metal he was now made of. Johnny seemed to feel the weight of her hesitation, his grin faltering, his prosthetic arm, the one that looked almost too perfect to be real, twitched slightly as he reached for her hand. "Nancy, lass, I didn't come back whole. I didn't come back the way you wanted me to. But I came back." His voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man he used to be. The man who had fought for his family, for his friends, for this very moment. Brex, standing slightly behind him, shifted uncomfortably. "Johnny's not the only one who's been through hell," he said, trying to ease the tension. "We all have. But that doesn't mean we can't still fight, still be who we are, no matter what's been done to us." Eppo, as usual, kept his distance, his eyes scanning the horizon. He wasn't much for sentiment. He was a soldier, through and through, his mind always on the next mission, the next objective. But even he couldn't hide the somber expression on his face. He had seen too much in the years we'd been together, and even though he kept his emotions locked down, they were still there. Nancy took a shaky breath, her eyes still locked on Johnny. "You're asking me to accept you like this," she said quietly. But how can I? How can I love the man you are now when I barely recognize you? Johnny's jaw clenched. I don't need you to love me like I was, Nancy. I need you to love me for who I am now. His voice was steady, but I could see the fight in his eyes. He was a soldier, yes, but more than that, he was a man who had been to the edge of death and back. He had survived things that should have killed him. And now, he was asking her to accept the new him, broken and rebuilt as he was. But Nancy wasn't the only one struggling with what had happened. We all were. Epo's thoughts were far away, as usual. But I knew he felt the weight of it. Brex, though he tried to hide it with his usual bravado, had a softness to him that came through in moments like this. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a person, just like the rest of us. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, until Epo finally spoke up. We didn't come here for this, he said bluntly, his gaze flicking to the other side of the village. There's something going on here, something that doesn't sit right. We're not just here for a reunion. That hit us all like a slap in the face. Epo was right. This wasn't just a homecoming. There was a deeper, darker reason we had landed on New Lisbon, something we hadn't fully understood until now. The truth was, we weren't the only ones who had been affected by the war. This planet, this so-called paradise, had been touched by the conflict in ways we couldn't see from the outside. There were whispers, rumors, of something bigger going on beneath the surface. A hidden threat, one that had been quietly growing in the shadows, while the rest of the galaxy went on with their lives. Nancy looked between us, her eyes still brimming with tears, but now filled with determination. What's happening here? What are you all hiding? None of us could answer right away. We had been on missions before, deep in enemy territory, and we knew the signs of something dangerous, lurking just out of sight. But this wasn't the same. This was New Lisbon, a planet that was supposed to be safe, a planet where people were supposed to come to forget about the chaos of the universe. But the universe didn't forget about anyone. Brex cleared his throat, the weight of the situation finally settling on him. There's been talk of disappearances, he said slowly, his voice serious. People have been vanishing, and the local authorities haven't said a word about it. But we've been hearing things, seeing signs that something isn't right here. We're not just here for a visit. We're here to investigate. That's when it hit me. What had really brought us to this so-called paradise? This wasn't a place for a vacation. This wasn't a place for healing. This was a place that was hiding something dangerous. And whatever it was, it had something to do with the very people we had come to protect. Nancy, her hands still trembling, glanced nervously at the other two members of our squad. What are you going to do about it? She asked, her voice rising, with an edge of urgency. You've been through hell and back. You can't let it keep going. You can't just walk away again. Johnny's expression was unreadable. He looked at her for a long moment before turning away, his mechanical limbs clicking softly as he moved. We can't leave. Not now. We came here to make sure nothing else happens. To make sure the people who were lost don't stay lost. His words were steady, but I could hear the unspoken pain in them. I knew then that whatever we had expected from this place, this so-called paradise, was nothing compared to the truth that lay ahead. We had come here to find peace, to find some semblance of normalcy after everything we had been through. But now we had a new mission, one that would take us deeper into the heart of New Lisbon, deeper into the mystery of what was really going on here. And as Nancy took a step closer to Johnny, her face full of both love and fear, I couldn't help but wonder, what would we find when we pulled back the curtain on this paradise? What would happen when the truth came crashing down? We had no answers. We only had each other. and that was the only thing that was certain anymore. The tension in the air was palpable. The calm of New Lisburn had been shattered, and with it, a new storm was about to begin. The next few days on New Lisburn blurred into a haze of tension and uncertainty. We didn't talk much about the mission, but we all knew what had to be done. The planet was hiding something dark, and every step we took seemed to pull us deeper into it. As we walked through the quiet village streets, there was an underlying feeling that we were being watched. Eyes lingered a little too long on us, the locals murmuring behind closed doors when they thought we weren't paying attention. Johnny was quieter than usual, his cybernetic parts humming with every movement. His face, once expressive, was now a mask of determination mixed with an unsettling emptiness. He still hadn't fully recovered from what had been done to him, and I could tell the guilt of not being the man Nancy remembered weighed heavily on him. But he wasn't backing down. He was fighting, not just for himself, but for the people of this planet, for Nancy, for us all. Brex, as usual, kept things light. He cracked jokes when things got too serious, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that betrayed his carefree attitude. He was always the first to jump into action, the first to move when things started to get heated. But even he knew this was different. There was no joking around anymore. Not here. Not with what we'd uncovered. It was Eppo who put the pieces together. After we'd spent days digging into the disappearances, the rumors of strange activity, he found something buried in the records, an old military report detailing a project that had been abandoned years ago, a project designed to push the limits of human augmentation. The more we read, the more it became clear. It wasn't just the planet that had been hiding something. It was the government, the very people who had once promised protection and peace. We had always known the Republic of Terra had its secrets. But this was something else. They had tested new technologies here, cybernetic enhancements, weapons that fused flesh and machine. And when the project went south, when things started going wrong, they shut it down and buried the evidence. But the technology didn't vanish. It lingered. It evolved. And now it was back, in the form of something much darker. Our investigation led us to an underground facility, hidden beneath one of the old farms. It had been abandoned for years, but the signs were unmistakable. The locks were old, rusted, but still strong enough to keep the truth hidden from the world. We breached the facility late one night, and that was when everything came to light. What we found down there wasn't just a simple lab or testing ground. It was a graveyard. There were bodies, dozens of them, some barely recognizable, others more machine than man, people who had been experimented on, turned into something unrecognizable, left to rot in the dark. This was no paradise. It was a prison, a place where the Republic had discarded its failures. But it wasn't just the people we found. We found something much worse. The project had gone further than anyone had imagined. The experiments had created something else entirely. Beings, half human, half machine, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment to rise up. I'll never forget the feeling of dread that crawled up my spine as we walked deeper into the facility. The silence was deafening, and every step we took felt heavier than the last. That's when we saw them, the creatures. They weren't human anymore. Their faces were covered in metal plating, their eyes glowing an unnatural red, and their movements were jerky, mechanical, like they were still learning how to be alive again. It was a nightmare come to life, but there was no time to think, no time to hesitate. We fought like we'd never fought before. Brex was the first to charge in, blasting the creatures with everything he had, his laughter and shouts echoing in the cavernous hall. Eppo and Johnny took the rear, covering us as we pushed forward, guns blazing. I was in the middle, firing shots, trying to keep the creatures at bay. But the closer we got, the more it felt like we were losing control. Every time we killed one of them, another seemed to appear. Then, just as the situation seemed impossible, Johnny stepped forward. He looked at me, a fire in his eyes that I hadn't seen in so long. "We end this," he said, his voice steady. Despite the chaos around him, he didn't need to say more. We knew what had to be done. With a fierce determination, Johnny led the charge. His cybernetic limbs moved with precision. And though he wasn't the same man Nancy had known, he was still the same soldier. He fought with everything he had, pushing forward, forcing the creatures back. And then, at the heart of the lab, we found it, the central control room, the source of the project, the heart of everything that had gone wrong. It was there we made our stand. With one last push, Johnny reached the central terminal, tearing through the systems with his bare hands. Despite the heavy cost, he hacked into the facility's mainframe, overriding the safety protocols, setting off a chain reaction that would destroy the lab and everything inside it. As the facility began to collapse around us, we ran. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. We had stopped the nightmare from getting any worse. But as we emerged from the wreckage, blinking in the light of New Lisbon's twin suns, we knew things could never go back to the way they were. The paradise we had come looking for didn't exist. But in its place, we had found something else, a purpose, a sense of closure for those who had been lost in the shadows. Johnny, his face still scarred and altered, turned to Nancy. She was standing there, waiting for him, her eyes full of uncertainty and hope. For a moment, there was silence between them. And then, with a slow, hesitant smile, Johnny reached for her hand. "I'm still here," he said softly, his voice full of both regret and resolve. Nancy took his hand, her fingers trembling, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. "You're still here," she whispered. The war had taken its toll on all of us, but in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we had all come home, broken, battered, but still standing. The paradise we had imagined didn't exist, but perhaps, in the end, that didn't matter. Because we were together, and we had survived, and that, in its own way, was enough.